the first battle, as he came across the Hellespont, the first battle is the Battle of Granicus, a little river there. There's a picture of it. The Battle of the River Granicus, where the Persians sent troops from the interior part of their empire up to meet him at that river. You see the little red scissors there where the battle took place? And here's a little picture of how it went. The Persians, of course, had sent troops to the river, which meant they had the high ground, they had the advantage, and so they would have the superior position, and it would virtually stop him because he wouldn't be able to get across the river. And instead, he spread out his troops wider and wider and wider, so this stretched the Persians and stretched the Persians. And then he, visible to everybody, feather in his helmet, so everybody knew who he was, because, of course, his own troops had to know who he was, but that meant the Persians knew who he was too. He led the cavalry charge right into the middle, up the bank of the river. So they had on the Persian side, they had a bank that they had to go up over, but he led his Bucephalus right up over that bank. His men followed him, and they just broke through the Persian line. The minute they did, then the Persian line collapsed. Now, this will happen again and again. In this case, this is the first time. And then the Persian army disperses. Here's the great Alexander sarcophagus. I'm showing it to you now because it's in Istanbul, and it's nice to know where you would see it. This is one of the greatest works of sculpture that is connected to Alexander. And it has pictures of him on Bucephalus and then other parts of the story all the way around. We're only seeing one side, but if you move all around it, they're different. This is beautiful sculpted marble, all plaques that are put onto the sarcophagus that has survived. With the Battle of Granicus, now he was in Asia Minor, and so the Persians pulled back, which is mainly what we're going to see now for the next 2 or 3 encounters. The Persians pulled back. Why was the Alexandrian army and the Greek army so successful? Because everything I tell you from here on in, that's what it's about. Well, number one, training. Number two, they were Greek brothers. That is, they saw each other as fellow Greeks. The Persian army is mixed. It's all kinds of fighters who come from all over the Persian Empire. Some of them are from Afghanistan. Some of them are from Tajikistan. Some of them are from Iran itself or Iraq. And they weren't particularly well integrated, and they weren't particularly cooperative. And in many cases, they couldn't speak to each other with a common language. And so when there was trouble, the Persian army could disintegrate very quickly because it lacked cohesion, it lacked unity. And the Greeks were exactly the opposite. So in all these stories that I have for you about some of these major battles, that is again and again the story. Now, we're in Asia Minor right now, and that means present-day Turkey. We're in Asia Minor, and he moved right straight down what was the grand road of the coast, the grand coastal road of Asia Minor, of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old, that coast road that led from Troy right through Ephesus and Miletus and Smyrna, Homer's city, and Halicarnassus, and all the way down to the bottom of Asia Minor, so that then eventually he was down here. He made a detour into the interior and then came back down. There was a state with power in the center, so he wanted to nullify any possibility of a powerful army at his back. And then at this point now, he had been all the way through Asia Minor and was now at one of the great junctures, which is still a major coastal road intersection because you're leaving present-day Turkey. You're on the south coast, and you're moving up to the edge of Syria, present-day Syria, and there's an intersection there on the road, which, of course, is a key decision. Are you going on the coast road to Egypt, or are you going interior into Iran and Iraq? And so already Darius, the emperor, the Persian emperor, had come to this place with the intention of encountering Alexander at that juncture, right? Exactly at that juncture. Here are the Persians that we're talking about. A lot of us are not up to date on all the different Persian emperors. So let me just sort of give you a quick idea. The grand figure, the Cyrus the Great, who really is responsible for building the great Persian Empire of the 6th century BC, meaning 500, is right there on our chart. And then at 500, so war with Athens, is his son Darius and grandson Xerxes. So the Persian emperors at 500 are leading that confrontation with Athens that they lose. So 500, 484, 74, 50, that's Darius and Xerxes. Now, tonight here we're talking about Darius III, who is the emperor, Persian emperor, inheriting this great empire, the biggest empire there was at that moment, based in Iran and Iraq, but then also including Afghanistan, the Middle East, and controlling Egypt too. And so now, in the confrontation between Alexander and Darius, we see sort of the continuation of that old confrontation between Persia and Greece. Now, the arrow there is pointing to the Battle of Issus. So that arrow points right to that little niche right back at the furthest little angle from east-west and north-south. And the coast at that point turns. First it's going east along the bottom of Turkey, and then it suddenly turns south and goes down what would be the Syrian coast near Antioch. And right there is a place called Issus and a little river. And Darius had already been through this territory and had continued going on. He was looking for Alexander. He wanted to confront him. This is 333. Alexander and Darius had passed each other. One was on one road, one was on another, and they had just gone right past each other. And so then their scouts came running back and informed each one of them, "Oh, your enemy is in the territory." And what Darius was doing was heading to that coast road, thinking he would head off Alexander. And Alexander had already gone past that point and gone to the interior a bit. And he had left some Greeks on the coast at the river to make a little camp. And Darius found them and massacred them and cut them up. So that it was a horrible, horrible massacre. People didn't do this to just a little camp. They weren't fighters. They were just there. And so some scout got loose and ran to tell Alexander what had happened. Alexander was enraged at this horrible violation of all protocol. And so now Alexander had to turn around and come back from the east, come back to this little river intersection and confront a Darius who was all prepared and was building up his camp and had taken over the coast and right here at this river, the river Panaris, which is there. This is a contemporary picture of the river. So the river comes down from the mountain and right into the Mediterranean and marks this place. It's all still there. One of the most important battles in all of history. Nobody knew what would happen once the Greeks were so far into Persian territory, very far away from their logistical support, very far away from the fleet, so no way anybody else could help them. Troops now already reduced. Some had gone home, some were sick, so already the army was reduced in size. What about Darius? Well, he was an extraordinary man. He was 6 feet tall, 6 inches. Huge, handsome, dark-haired, powerful imperial figure who lived like an emperor, not like Alexander. Alexander had no particular entourage, no particular fancy tents, none of that. And Darius did. Darius was part of this many hundreds of years old Persian Empire with enormous wealth. And so now here, these two armies converged. November 333, the Battle of Issus. So now these two armies moved to this very small territory because you had hills just a mile from the ocean, from the Mediterranean, and a very narrow coastal plain along which these two armies would be forced to confront each other, and a river cutting the east side from the west side, and the Persians already all settled in there on the west side, so that it was a terrible strategic situation for Alexander, but he was not afraid. He knew exactly what he was going to do, And so he turned his army around from out in the country and marched back to Isis. Of course, they knew exactly where this was because they'd just been there. So they were well prepared for understanding the topography, and that's important. And during the night, he arrived on this spot with his army and began to move them into position in the dark. And so when the Persians woke up and looked at the plain, narrow plain, here were the Greeks slowly moving their men down. They would march onto this narrow strip, big wide army, and then it would break down, from 32 to 16 to 8, and they would move into place, and another one come in, and another one come in, and they were doing all this in full view of the Persians. And so Darius just sat there in his cart. I've got a picture of it here in a minute. The numbers are tens of thousands, and we're not exactly sure what numbers on, but we know the Persians were way more than the Greeks, and that will be true. There are 3 big battles, huge battles, and in each one the numbers are 5 to 1 at least. In some it's believed it's even bigger than that. So slowly the Greeks moved into position, hour by hour by hour. Persians just sat there right at the river and watched. And of course the day went by and everybody wondered what was going to happen. All the Persians could see was this Greek precision where the Greeks would march in, and they would split off, and they would march in, they would split off, and pretty soon the whole plain was full from water to foothill, and same with the Persians. So here were the 2 armies. The Persians, of course, assumed, as it was late afternoon, that the next day would be the battle. So they began, talking ready for the battle tomorrow. Instead, Alexander intended all along to attack the minute he got his men in position, which he did at 4 in the afternoon. Total surprise to the Persians, and the Greeks just came right across the river. And although the Persians could hold because they had water and they had the advantage of being defensive, the precision of the Greeks was really too hard for them to stop completely, and so they just slowly pushed, and then all out of the blue, all of this was exactly his plan. The right flank, which you'd think his enemy would have figured out because he did this every time. Right flank, that's where Alexander was, visible, helmet, big white feathers, so everybody knew. He and the cavalry, right flank, all of a sudden swept around the right side, just swept all the way around the right side of the Persians, which were all pushed into the middle trying to stop the infantry, pushed around and just broke around behind the Persians. Just went all the way around. Not huge numbers, but enough so that all of a sudden Darius was in danger of being captured. So the order was given, disperse, he and his leadership group suddenly left the battlefield to protect themselves. Their men saw this, and so the whole Persian army just went hysterical, and all the discipline broke down, and they were just massacred, but a lot of it by their own men, because the front rows of the Persians trying to escape just mowed down the men behind them, and those men mowed down, and pretty soon it was just this horrible crush of troops pushing back. They couldn't go into the water, they couldn't go into the mountains, they were just pushing back on their own men, and it was a complete disaster. Total rout on the part of the Greeks. Total massive destruction of the Persian army with very little loss. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but just extraordinary numbers of out of balance where huge death on the part of the Persians, a lot of it inflicted by their own men, just crushing them, and very few Greek fatalities. So that is the Battle of Isis, November 333. When it was over, here is the Alexander mosaic. Now this is, I told you, I said I'm going to show you a picture of it. This is a picture of it. There was a painting done of this battle immediately afterward by a Greek painter. And then later, a Roman painter copied it, and it was put into a mosaic in Italy, in Pompeii. So this was preserved in Italy for hundreds and hundreds of years, and now you can see it. We're looking at a picture of it today in the Naples Archaeological Museum. So you can go and stand right in front of it. This is about 20 feet long and 9 feet tall and almost 17 feet wide. And it tells us the story of the Battle of Issus. Now, that's Alexander. That's Alexander in the battle. And you're going to say, well, his hair is darker. It looks darker, but it's still him. I don't know if you catch it. Do you catch that that's him? Does it look to you like it's him? Because if I put him up there, you see it's the same face. It's that same tilt of the head. It's the same eyes, the same chin, same line of the chin. He had this sort of a regal sort of tilt to his head that was immediately recognizable. But except that the hair looks darker, it's definitely him. Here is Darius. Darius in his chariot, great, huge, spectacular chariot with a 6'6" man in it. So you can imagine what a thing this was to see. And then all the men fighting. And there are great details in this. Here's the horse. I know we don't want the horsey to get hurt, but isn't that a great detail as an artist? Just think of the unlikeliness of this surviving, of this painting. And there it is. Here's Darius in the chariot, in his spectacular chariot. It was a gorgeous chariot with beautiful, beautiful wheels and beautiful painting. But he's fleeing the field, and of course, ever after, it hurt his reputation. Now he wasn't doing anything wrong, because a king is supposed to get off the field and save himself. A king is not supposed to allow himself to be captured. It's a terrible thing for any state to have the king get captured. And so he was doing the right thing. But it was a public relations disaster, because the Persians were furious. They felt he deserted his men. The Greeks made fun of him, of course. And so the poet writers and all immediately began blackening his reputation, and he really never lived it down. It really harmed him in his leadership right after the Battle of Issus. Now, when the battle was over, and the dead and the dying were tended to and buried, and Alexander and Hephaestion moved through the Persian lines and moved back to look at Darius's tent, which he'd been living in, Alexander walked in and said, "So this is what it is to live like a king." Don't you love it? And then, while they were looking over this beautiful tent, they heard this high-pitched, screaming female voices singing this terrible high-pitched noise, and he said, "What is that?" And they said, "Oh, those are the Persian women, the wives of Darius and family, because they assume they're all going to be killed." And so Alexander said, go bring them in. So Darius's mother and wife and son were all brought in to meet Alexander. And when they came in, this is a 17th century painting, but when they came in, Sigambas threw herself down in front of Hephaestion, made a mistake, because Hephaestion was taller and more handsome than Alexander. So she went down in front of Hephaestion, and then everybody said, "Psst, psst, 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 psst. No, the wrong one. And then she apologized and jumped up and went to Alexander. And Alexander says, "Never mind, mother, he is Alexander too." I love that quote. Because that tells you how close they were. And he raised her up and said, "Have no fear, we're going to take care of you. You travel back with us. We're going, to Persia, and so you come with us." And they became very close friends. You're all going to ask me what language. Greek. Of course, a Persian royalty knows Greek. He and Sisigambis became lifelong friends.